You're listening to Speaking of Faith with Bishop D.D. Duncan Proby of the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York. I'm Rachel Ravalette, or RomComm, and we're glad you're here.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Speaking of Faith with Bishop D.D. I am, of course, not Bishop D.D. I am Rachel Ravalette. I'm the Communications Director for the Diocese of Central New York in the Episcopal Church. If you don't know where that is, as Bishop D.D. says, it's from Canada to Pennsylvania and Utica to Elmira and all the beautiful places and people in between. So I am here today with a voice and a face that you will recognize, of course. I'm here with Reverend Megan Castellan, Canon to the Ordinary for Mission and Formation. And Bishop D.D. is not here because, we really do try in our episodes not to get super nerdy, but we're kind of throwing that out the window today. And so I really enjoy working with Canon Megan. She is loving and super smart. And I also enjoy that she is also a super church nerd. And this is a bit of a selfish podcast episode on my part. I guess it's producer's prerogative. But we're coming up on the 81st General Convention of the Episcopal Church. So technically it is from June 23rd to 28th this year in Louisville, Kentucky. And even though I like to consider myself a church nerd, I'm really a baby church nerd because this is my first General Convention. And so I brought in my favorite church nerd to tell me what the heck is going on and what this is all about. So, Canon Megan, what is the General Convention?
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I am honored to be acclaimed as a super church nerd. This is something I have long aspired to, and I am edified that I have achieved. I've achieved this status. I have been attending general conventions since I was a baby child of 13 in 1997, which will date me immediately. And so I think I've only missed 2 since then.
Okay.
But General Convention is, in a technical sense, the both an event that we hold every 3 years approximately, and it is an entity. It is the body gathered. It is the highest authority in the church, right under Jesus, the Creator and the Holy Spirit. So in the Episcopal Church, the entity that makes decisions, that tells us what we do, that tells us what the rules are, is General Convention. The body gathered together to make decisions every 3 years, more or less. We kind of lost track of that ebb and flow during the pandemic. It's happened before during the Civil War, but we're back on track now. So that's, in a nutshell, what General Convention technically is. But to describe the experience of General Convention, think about a family reunion combined with a shopping mall, combined with the British Parliament, all mushed together for 10 days. And that's kind of what the experience, combined with like a massive weird party. And that's more what the experience feels like.
Okay. So 23rd through the 28th, but
yes,
we will be in Kentucky for longer than that.
Yes.
What happens? So the shopping mall part is very interesting. I'm assuming you're talking about the expo hall.
Yes, the exhibit hall. There will be an entire ballroom dedicated to various interest groups throughout the church, publishers, people selling things. The pension fund will be there. The local diocese will have an area. People giving away food. If you're hungry, it's always a place to get snacks.
That's really good. That's a good tip. Thank you.
It's a hot tip. You heard it here first. There's swag all of the swag you can shake a stick at. All of the vestment makers will be there. It's always a place to go and stock up if you need like new clergy shirts. Another pro tip, one year I forgot to pack clergy shirts and I got to go there and buy them. So anybody who, and a number of groups that sort of sell things connected with the Episcopal Church, like a lot of NGOs go there as well and sell things. Thistle Farms usually comes. So everybody will walk around smelling like lavender. So the big point of General Convention is the governance. So General Convention, besides being an event, is a body, an entity. It's a two-house body that is the highest authority in the church, which we said. And for these 6 days in which it's gavelled into existence, it will be making decisions on behalf of the church to tell us what to do for the next 3 years. So you're going to have the House of Bishops, which is all the bishops gathered, and they will be making decisions. You also will have the House of Deputies. And the House of Deputies is composed of deputations from each diocese around the church. In each diocese is allowed to send up to 4 clergy and 4 lay people elected from each diocese. Not all dioceses send their full allotment. Some dioceses can't afford to send it, which has been a kind of point of tension. But I think it's 112 dioceses we have now around the worldwide Episcopal Church. So we're looking at 800 and some deputies in the House. Will sit and vote on legislation. All legislation has to be passed exactly the same between both houses in order to become sort of codified within the church. That's kind of the big work of General Convention, is to kind of write legislation and make it happen within the church.
So what is this legislate? Like, what kinds of things are we talking about here?
So there are a couple of buckets that legislation falls into. There are there's canons and constitution, kind of amending our church laws and making sure they apply to the way the church actually functions now. Stuff like our disciplinary processes for clergy and for bishops, and seeing how we might actually make it apply to lay people who work in the church too. That's an ongoing conversation. There's stuff around the prayer book, how we pray together. For Episcopalians, this is an incredibly important issue because for us, we don't have a written document that lays out what we believe. We don't have a written book of doctrine. What we have is the prayer book that unifies us. And so we treat the prayer book with the same weight. We treat literally with the same weight as the Constitution and the canons. So prayer book revisions and changes is another bucket of stuff we look at during General Convention. There are also kind of policy statements. We do, and this is sort of an ongoing topic of debate every time we gather. We do talk about things that happen in the world. So you will see, particularly this time around, a lot of conversation around Israel-Palestine. We always talk about gun violence and ways the church feels about it. The reason for these conversations has to do with our presence on the global stage. When General Convention passes a policy statement, that allows our lobbying office in Washington to have license to begin to push on legislatures in the name of the church in that direction. So we do have a lobbying arm in Washington, and they take their cue from what we pass in General Convention.
So can you give an example of kind of a constitutions and canons issue that might come up? Because it seems to me like those are supposed to be like pretty stable parts of that describe how how we've agreed, how we've decided we are going to gather together as a particular faith community and a faith body. So why would something like that change? And what's an example of that?
So a good example would be the merger of dioceses.
Okay.
It used to be dioceses were only able to merge when both had elected bishops. And so that was actually a problem because it meant that tiny dioceses without any money had to go through entire bishop elections and searches. And then bishops would have to basically merge themselves out of a job. And we were noticing that no one really wanted to do that. That it was sort of it was so weird. It was sort of the structure was disincentivizing them from merging. And there were definitely places where mergers needed to happen because we had these little dioceses that were running out of money. So I think two general conventions ago or so, we changed that canon to make it so that dioceses were now able to approach General Convention and ask for a merger just by the power of the standing committee if they didn't have a bishop. Okay. And so this time around, we have two such cases. Eastern and Western Michigan, where you are, is going to ask for a merger, which is great news for the church. And Wisconsin, Fond du Lac and Milwaukee is going to remerge. I think it's Fond du Lac and Milwaukee. It's some of those tiny, tiny Wisconsin dioceses that have all splintered and now are coming back together. But particularly the Eastern and Western Michigan one couldn't have happened without that canon change. Because you would have had bishops, voting themselves out of a job. And, everybody likes to have a job. Everybody likes to have a salary. So, that's one sort of clear, non-controversial example.
So I'm thinking of Schoolhouse Rock here.
Yeah.
And actually, the House of Deputies TikTok 2 years ago at the post mid-pandemic convention had a great TikTok about using the "I'm Just a Bill" song to kind of talk through the process. So can you talk us through the process? Somebody's sitting. Let's use that example. Somebody's sitting in Saginaw, Michigan, and is like, you know what? We need to be one diocese, but we already function as one. We have the same staff, but we don't have a bishop for each. So how do we go from that, somebody noticing a pinch point or a pain point and saying, this has got to change?
So I can't do it as well as Sophie because they are very good and they're back on TikTok.
They're fantastic. Yes. Their TikToks already this General Convention have been fantastic.
Yeah. So I highly recommend Sophie and their TikToks. Basically, there are a couple of ways that legislation gets introduced. If you are what's called an interim body, if you are a task force that was commissioned by General Convention, you can write a resolution. Hooray for you. And you can submit it in what's called the Blue Book, which is at the moment neither blue nor a book because we like to make things complicated. And so that's what's called an A resolution. Then if you are a bishop, awesome for you. You can get two of your buddies together and you can write a resolution. And those are called B resolutions because of bishops. See, B for bishop.
I got it.
Very clever. And then if you are a diocese, you can, your person in Saginaw could write a resolution, submit it to your local diocesan convention and say, I would like this to go to General Convention. I think the whole diocese should get behind this and put it to General Convention. And so the diocese can vote on it, approve it, and say, we want to put this forward to General Convention. Those are called C resolutions because we decided to get confusing. And then once we get closer to General Convention, there are D resolutions because if you're a deputy, your person in Saginaw can also call up their deputation and say, I have this idea. Could you write legislation around it? And so if you're a deputy, you and 3 of your closest friends who are also deputies can put forward legislation. Those are called D resolutions. So once your resolution is formed, you submit it, and then it goes to a legislative committee. So part of the reason you and I will go to General Convention early is partially because of our boss. And I think she's doing something at convention. I'm not sure.
I've heard her name come up in a few conversations.
Yeah.
For those of you who are not following our sarcasm there, Bishop Dede is one of 5 bishops who have been nominated to appear on the slate, because that's one thing we're doing this year. So we have trienniums, and then we have trienniums.
Trienniums.
Every 9 years, we elect a new presiding bishop. So the permit of the Episcopal Church. So yeah, our boss is a little busy this General Convention.
Yep.
So but that's one reason we're going early.
That's one reason is the meetings of legislative committees.
Okay.
So legislative committees are just like in Congress. They are subgroups of the House of Bishops and House of Deputies. You have representation from both on your little committee. There are legislative committees for all of the subject areas. And so those will meet, they will consider and have hearings on every single piece of legislation. And they will discuss it. They will decide whether they think it's a good idea or not. They will mark it up. They will combine resolutions that are similar, so stuff doesn't get bogged down. They will amend it. They will, do all the stuff. Most of the work gets done in legislative committees. The hearing part is important. Any person on the planet Earth can testify in a hearing about
maybe
legislation.
Astronauts also.
Maybe astronauts also, particularly because we are moving towards online hearings rather than in-person hearings. So in the past, before the pandemic, all of the hearings would happen at General Convention at the convention center. So you would have to be like in Austin, in Minneapolis, like wandering by and show up that day. The hearings would be publicized, but you would need to be like in the room and say, here's what I think about this thing that you're talking about. You didn't have to be Episcopalian. You didn't have to be a deputy. You didn't have to be anything. You could just like offer your opinion. Now we're holding hearings online way before General Convention. So anybody who has a thought about the subject matter can offer an opinion in the hearing. So they're way more inclusive than they used to be. And you can offer written testimony, which you didn't used to be able to do either. So way more inclusive than they used to be. And that is by design. One of the sort of values of the Episcopal Church and the way that we've designed General Convention is that we really place an emphasis on everybody's voice being heard. And particularly lay people, particularly people that aren't often heard from in church governance, that everybody's voice is as valuable as the next person. And while there is sort of a counterweight at times, we have the idea that the Holy Spirit speaks when all of us are speaking and listening to each other. And not just a particular group.
So it's not just about like moving through this process. Really, what I hear you saying is that ultimately this body/event is like a nexus for discernment.
Yes. One of the things that will often surprise people who go is how much prayer happens. And we really pray a lot. which I realize sounds ridiculous, but there is a lot of prayer, very intentional prayer. Anybody,
That's
one of
part
the rules
our
of
baptismal covenant. It's like
yeah,
one of the
but
very first things we say.
yeah, but we it's again one of the values of convention is that we take that very seriously. One of the rules of order says any person in the House of Deputies has the right to go to the microphone and call for a moment of prayer.
Wow.
And people do it before if people feel that the vote is going to be controversial, they will call for a moment of prayer from the chaplain, and everybody gets quiet and we pray. And that happens a lot. The kind of refrain you will hear from old timers is that you never make up your mind about something before you go to convention, because listening to other people, listening to kind of the debate, listening to the way the gathering is moving will change your approach to things. And it's that experience that tends to have the most impact. So it's really and the reason I love it is that it's a really prayerful, discerning experience in ways that you wouldn't expect it to be. Even as it's a weird party full of quirky people and there are all the politics that you would expect. It's also incredibly prayerful and discerning, and everyone is really open.
Peoply but prayerful.
Peoply but prayerful, yes.
Well, I'm getting super psyched. I was already super psyched, but this sounds fantastic. But I'm going to be there. You're going to be there.
Yes.
We have a wonderful deputation from Central New York. Of course, Bishop Didi is going to be there.
Yep.
If I am a member at, let's say, Zion Rome.
Yep.
And I'm there. I'm an active member of my parish. But why should I care? I'm not going to be in Louisville. I mean, good. It sounds like good for you. That sounds really prayerful. It sounds like a great way to see your friends and pray together and worship together. I've heard people are starting to tell me, like, just wait for the worship. It's going to be really, really spirit-filled and a unique experience. But I'm not going. I'm still going to work 5 days a week and enjoying all the beautiful things that Rome, New York has to offer. Why do I care what's going on in Louisville, Kentucky?
For one, it is a testimony about what the church cares about. So this time particularly, you're going to see a lot of conversation about how we make the church safe for all people, how we are a witness to God's inclusive love to all people. Every time we gather in General Convention, we are a testimony to the world because we're loud and big. This is a large gathering of Episcopalians. We take over a lot of real estate in the city. We took over a lot of real estate social media wise. We tend to get some coverage in the press, not as much as we used to, thank God. But we sort of take up real estate in a way we don't usually. And so General Convention becomes for us a time to do sort of humble brag evangelism, to talk about what matters to us and what we're about as a church. And it also is a time to kind of celebrate what we're good at. We're good at being together. We're good at listening to the Spirit. We're good at praying together. And we're good at having hard conversations in public. In 2003, I was at General Convention when we had the vote to confirm Gene Robinson, and I was marked that as the moment I fell in love with the institution of the church.
Just for context, Gene Robinson
was the first openly gay bishop. Yes. One of the things I remember about that time is a reporter from, that was one of the times we got a lot of secular media attention.
Sure. Yeah, 2003. I mean, on the one hand, it doesn't seem that long ago, but things were very different, especially for our LGBTQIA siblings in 2003.
Yeah, things were we were still getting picketed
Yeah.
at the convention site. For one, we don't get picketed anymore. I kind of miss it,
Oh,
honestly. Maybe we'll get picketed in Louisville. Let's root for that. I would like a good.
Let's hope for detractors.
I would like a good picketing. I don't. No, I don't. I want the world to get better than that. But one of the things I remember is in the days after we had confirmed Bishop Robinson, one of the writers of the Dallas Morning News wrote an op-ed that got widely circulated among the Bible convention, and he said, you can say a lot about the Episcopal Church, but they really seem to love each other. And I really treasured that. It had been a very emotional time. But hearing somebody from the outside say, look at these people and how they love each other was sort of a, that didn't last. Clearly, we then went right over the waterfall. But in that moment,
people are still gonna people.
People will still people. But for that window of time, I think that was accurate. One of the things I treasure about convention is, you're stuck in a room with 2,000 of your closest Episcopal friends, and you kind of see them every 3 years, and whether you agree with them or not, you develop a weird sort of Stockholm syndrome fondness for them, which gets you through a lot. So, and I would, rest happy if the world looked at us and said, look at those Episcopalians, see how they love each other.
Yeah. So 2003, it was Gene Robinson, and really it was the broader issue of LGBTQ clergy, which we know our siblings in other denominations are still struggling with. So that was kind of that was the headline from 2003. We're remembering that 50 years ago, it was women's ordination to the priesthood. And well, hi there, Reverend Megan. What are some of the things that you think we should really be paying attention to if I'm going to be there offering social media coverage, connecting with our deputies, trying to help people in Central New York feel more connected to the wider church and what's going on, stay informed? What are some of the things that you're anticipating will be kind of the headlines from this convention?
It's going to be the elections. I think the presiding bishop election is going to be big. It's going to take up a lot of real estate. The president of the House of Deputies election. There is a real tension in the church right now about the progress we've made since the pandemic, whether that is good or not, or whether we need to go back. There is a real, in some corners, there is a real attempt to pull it back. And so I think what we're going to see over and over popping up in a lot of different places is an effort to either modulate the changes that have come since the pandemic, or an effort to sort of say, okay, these were good. We need to move forward. Here's what we're doing.
We can't put the toothpaste back.
Right. We can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's what this means for us. That tension is really pronounced.
So that's playing out in the elections. Is that what I'm understanding? But is it also playing out in resolutions?
Yes. There are resolutions, again, to lengthen the length of General Convention, which would be a reversal from the way we've done things the past, I think, 3 or 4 General Conventions. There's been a real attempt to make it shorter. There's an attempt now to make it longer. So there are a couple of things like that. There's a move to fund provinces again, which is a similar sort of let's we've gone too far. Let's go back.
So provinces are, just for people who are listening who maybe aren't that, so they're kind of like, so we've got the wider church, and then we've got provinces, and then we have diocese, and then we have parishes. And provinces right now are kind of like an unfunded mandate, if we want to use the government analogy.
And some places, provinces are a vestigial, they are like an appendix. We're not sure what they do. They are a vestigial appendage from before the Civil War, when we were trying to find a way around the slavery division. And so if you look at some of the lines that are drawn by provinces, so like my former stomping grounds of West Missouri and Kansas. West Missouri, the line between West Missouri and Kansas goes straight down the middle of Kansas City, Missouri.
Interesting.
They are in separate provinces.
Okay.
Because of slavery.
Okay.
West Missouri is in Province 5, Kansas is in Province 6. They do nothing together, or did nothing together. I think that may have changed now. Because there was an attempt prior to the Civil War to set up church structures that enabled dioceses to meet together without forcing pro-slavery and anti-slavery dioceses to meet together, because that would be offensive to the pro-slavery diocese. So provinces were a structure that was created in that time to attempt that to happen. It didn't work long term. Civil War came, but provinces are a remnant of that, and so.
And some are very active, like our own province, Central New York, and actually Bishop Dede is the president of our province too, the International Atlantic Province, which includes a convocation of Episcopal churches in Europe, Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and then kind of like the
U.S. Virgin Islands,
right, Virgin Islands, and then like kind of the Eastern Seaboard,
New York, New Jersey,
and Western Pennsylvania. Or northwestern Pennsylvania. And we this year did our slave trade lament service on Ash Wednesday, which was super powerful. We had a great synod a few weeks ago where we talked about, how do we want to use our provincial voice? But yeah, it's kind of like, what are we doing? So that's one of the issues that's coming up in General Convention.
Some of the provinces work really well together. Some of them don't do anything. And so it's sort of up to the individual personalities in the province and what their history is and how they've related to each other. It's really hit or miss. And so that's an issue.
You mentioned prayer book as well.
Prayer
as
book.
Another issue that's going to be big.
Yeah, somewhat hilariously, there is a really non-controversial resolution to put the same-sex marriage right into the prayer book proper, and everyone's like, okay, no, there's no controversy about it, whatever, which I think is great. Like, look how far we've come. Everyone's like,
21 years, not that long.
Yeah, cool, do it. It was proposed by the Bishop Dede's task force on communion across difference. So the task force with the most conservative bishops in it were like, yeah, we should do this. Okay.
Right. So there's another great example of how we love each other. Like, we talk about a big tent and making space for everyone. Yeah.
They're like, cool, let's do. And there's something else about sort of tweaking the definition of what the prayer book has to do with like the ingredients of the 79 prayer book, and it's a complicated thing, but it has to do with clergy and doctrine and what's heresy, and it's sort of like into the weeds.
And if I understand correctly, even though it's non-controversial, changes like that take 2 general conventions, right?
Yes, this would be the first reading. Yeah.
Okay. So even though we have like we don't just go about and we're like, this canon kind of weird, let's change it. Okay, fine, it's changed. Like it's an inclusive process, and it's a process of discernment that takes 6 years.
There's a fair amount of conversation around the disciplinary process, particularly Title IV. Yeah, particularly as it pertains to bishops.
Okay,
that has been a real point of pain over the past 2 years. There have been some high profile stories regarding bishops where, for whatever reason, it appears that the Title IV process was not adequately followed. And it's tough to tell from the outside what exactly happened, but there's going to be a lot of conversation about what's going on in the House of Bishops.
So
how do we
conversations that have a lot of pain
Yeah.
involved with them. So yeah, really getting into, to borrow, this is not a phrase I like. I feel like millennials especially use this a lot, especially millennial Christians, but how are we going to do life together?
Yeah. Well, and this is sort of the hard thing about General Convention, because you do sort of develop the Stockholm Syndrome thing with people. It becomes more painful when that relationship is somehow betrayed, right? When there needs to be accountability in that relationship and it's not there. And so it's a real double-edged sword, that we have a church that is primarily built on relationship. And the Episcopal Church has always been built on the understanding that you will be in close relationship with these people. That's, and there are good parts of those assumptions and bad parts of those assumptions. I mean, there's a part of that sort of assumes that the people you're in relationship with, you're in relationship because they're all rich white guys that went to the same boarding schools. And so that's why you're in relationship with them. Now it's more, you're in relationship because you've chosen it. You're in the same rooms. You're committed to each other. But that assumption of relationship needs to be tended and needs to be worked on and needs to be built on a basis of accountability. And that is sometimes a part that we struggle with, particularly when we find it painful. And that is a really, to borrow Bishop Didi's phrase, that's a very tender work that sometimes is difficult. And so I think this General Convention in particular, there's going to be a lot of talk about how do we hold one another accountable? What does it mean when that accountability feels like it's failed? And what do we need to do to kind of beef that up?
So a lot to look forward to, a lot to pay attention to. I'll be doing my best to break it down into bite-sized pieces over the next couple of weeks. And I will also be doing my best to eat all the best food that Louisville has to offer, and connect with friends across the church, make new friends across the church. And thank you for helping me with my very selfish podcast episode to help me get oriented to the General Convention, which is coming up in just a little bit more. It's the 12th when we're recording this.
Yeah.
So we've got about 11 days before it's officially gavelled into existence. So I invite everyone to follow along with our social media, but also join with us in prayer over this time. The prayer doesn't just happen when someone goes up to the mic and calls for prayer from the chaplain. If we can be praying across the church for this important time of discernment about how we're going to live together, what it means to be the Episcopal Church, who our leaders are going to be, I think that's really important. And I will see you in Louisville. And thank you so much for nerding out with me today, Canon Megan. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
So join us next week. We'll share an episode related to more conversations across different, kind of what we talked about in our most recent episode, but especially as we're looking at our country's other Independence Day of Juneteenth, and what that means for people in the Black community, and how we can be good listeners and love each other well and heal together. Until next time, may you be blessed and be a blessing. Take care, friends.
Thanks for joining us. Speaking of Faith with Bishop Didi is a production of the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York. Our theme music is by Fleece Mob, and it's called A Bird in Hand. We use it with permission. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast through your favorite podcasting app so that you can be the first to know when new episodes are available. If you like what you've heard here, please leave us a rating and review. If you don't like what you've heard here, we're sure you're still a wonderful person, but maybe don't leave us a review. Just kidding. We love honest feedback and questions. You can connect with us online between episodes at cnyepiscopal.org/podcast and on social media at CNY Episcopal. Blessings to you, friends.